I'm Jim Check. You're watching Now Media. We've been doing a lot on small businesses. We've interviewed a ton of people at BIABC. We even had Terry Young on. Well, I'm going to back up on that, but we did about the crime stuff. But we've been doing lots on business for sure. And now you put out this press release here saying small businesses are telling us they're exhausted, overtaxed, and ready to give up. And the Terry Young one was about the crime that was actually causing businesses to have a lot of trouble. But it seems like they're getting attacked from everywhere, right? Not just from crime, but just in taxation. And they're just exhausted, as you're saying.
Yeah, Jim, the burden on small business is obviously not just one thing. It is taxes, it's red tape, it's the higher cost of borrowing with higher interest rates. It's a soft economy with low consumer confidence and low consumer discretionary spending. And as you alluded to, it's the vandalism and violence that is affecting our small business districts all over British Columbia. So small businesses are I would say traumatized. I was just up north in Prince George, Williams Lake, and Quesnel, meeting with small businesses and service providers in those areas. You just look into the eyes of any small business person and they're just absolutely exhausted. Many of them are dealing with actual trauma and PTSD. They've dealt with dead bodies out front of their businesses. They've dealt with break-ins, vandalism. They've had businesses burning down in their neighborhoods. It's really really tough out there for small business, and we need to see some serious relief and some serious help from government.
Yeah, I know. I did that interview with Terry Young, the BIABC, and I think you added to that file as well. And it's just like that the crime aspect of it, the vandalism aspect of it, the like you just said, buildings burning down. We just did that story in Prince George, that brewery that burnt down. It
So
seems like
I was next to that brewery. Literally, that brewery burnt down less than 6 hours after we were doing a small business public safety town hall across the street. So it really hit home for all of us who were there. We toured that business district. We saw the burn marks on the buildings. We saw the vandalism. We saw the vagrancy. We saw the issues that folks are dealing with there. We heard from 50 or more people who were at that event telling us what was happening. We left, and then that building burnt down. It couldn't have hit home more for all of us who were there.
yeah. Then that BIABC study said 1 in 5 businesses may not make it the year, and that's a big stat, right? When you're talking about I think 20% of British Columbian businesses, small businesses, not being able to make it another year. And this all kind of ties together in that on the burned down building, that one that really kind of troubling for lots of businesses, that's a repeat offender, right? And this bail reform thing becomes front and center. We did this story with Tom Dias too, and I'm interviewing him next week as well. Where one offender here in Kelowna has like 222 active files, 32 failures to appear. So the question is, how many does he need before they don't let him out again? Like, is it 35? Is it 50? Is it 70? Like, what is the number before the courts say, okay, so we can't trust you to let you out because you failed to appear? Like, is
And
there
and
a
what is
number?
the aggregate cost? What is the
Yeah.
aggregate cost of all of those offenses? Not only in terms of enforcement, not only in terms of the costs to healthcare, if there are also drugs or mental health involved, but also in terms of the direct impacts to small business in the form of vandalism and theft, and also the indirect impacts as our business districts become places that people don't want to go anymore because they feel unsafe.
And then this part of it too, and I think you've said it, and Renee Merrifield, the former MLA, has said it, the amount of new taxes since the NDP has taken power is in above 30, isn't it? Like the amount of new taxes that have been put on the BC consumer and the BC businesses, the employer's health tax, the extra sick days, and all these things add up to make it really tough for businesses. And then we're not competitive either. We've got a chart here, micro business pays 20% more taxes in Canada than the US. We're going to put this
Yeah,
chart up.
it's very high. And to your point, Renee was always a consistent fighter on that front in her time as my predecessor. But we've seen 30 plus tax hikes. We've seen increasing regulatory burden. We've seen increasing uncertainty for any business that involves, working on the land base in the wake of the Cowichan decision and other things. As you alluded to, we've got such a high tax burden. We've got incredibly weak business confidence, consumer confidence, economic fundamentals. We are in a spiral. Stephen Paulos was out this morning with an op-ed saying we're heading into a recession. And that is transparently evident to anybody who pays attention to the economy in this province and in this country.
So, what kind of help do you hear that businesses need? What do they need? Like, what does the NDP government need to do to get help to these businesses before it's too late?
Well, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business had a new report out today talking about tax burden, and that's obviously a really important area. What I hear when I talk to small businesses is that they want government to actually listen to them. Stop going in circles, stop writing more reports, implement the changes that they've been asking for months, if not for years. You and I have talked before about the situation with craft distillers. We've talked about what's happening in forestry. We've talked about what's happening in craft breweries. We've talked about what's happening in terms of that violence and vandalism in our downtown business areas. What needs to be done is really obvious. Government needs to stop going in circles, stop spending all their time talking about Donald Trump, and start actually delivering results, delivering help for small business on the many items that are within the scope of their control, which includes the regulatory environment, it includes taxes, it includes a litany of other areas where they can actually make things better so that small business can create jobs, create opportunities, contribute to the economy, and contribute to the tax base. They've got to get focused on this stuff. They've got to get serious. And frankly, they've got to get some people who actually have even a vague understanding of how small business works into decision making roles within government. Because, when I look across the aisle at the NDP, I see next to zero understanding of how business works at any level.
Yeah, there's very little incentive right now in British Columbia to hire more people. I mean, it seems to be the other way around because I know once you get over that threshold, they put in a thing over 50 because we were at 55 at one point. Now we're way below that because of the, Bill C-18 and a bunch of other regulatory issues, that seems to be an attack on media. But where is like incentive to businesses to hire more people, to invest in more capital? Those are the big things. How do we get investment into capital? And like when they did the 5 sick days during COVID, said they were going to help people, and they said that half of that was going to be covered by the government. But as soon as it came out, though, they said, well, you're going to get 5 sick days to everybody, and there's no help. You're just going to pay for it. And then I've talked to some restaurateurs, and they say they've got a bunch of part-time staff that work in 3 or 4 of their restaurants, and they get 5 sick days in every one of those part-time jobs. And so they're just like all of a sudden they've got 20 paid sick days in a year.
Yeah, Jim, that's where, the challenge is that we have policymakers in government who either don't understand or don't care about the implications of their policies for small business. So they end up implementing these policies where they don't understand the cumulative effect, or they don't understand how one policy intersects with another and what it does to business, or they don't understand that something that sounds nice on paper is actually really complicated. A great example of that, it was the securing small business rebate program the government rolled out as basically a photo op around vandalism. They rolled it out 2 years ago, and over the 18 months it was active, there was $10.5 million available. There was a lot of vandalism happening, and they only managed to get $2 million out the door because it was so poorly designed that small businesses actually didn't end up using it. So there's got to be some smarter thinking and some better listening to the voices of the small business community who are desperate for help and who are offering constructive suggestions, as the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the chambers, and many others have been doing over the last number of years. These people are exhausted at a grassroots level, the small businesses, and I think the institutional industry associations and groups that represent them are frankly exhausted at saying the same thing over and over and over and over again to government and not really getting any uptake.
I think they're at odds with themselves a lot of times, and I'll give you an example because of what you just said about the applying for that grant. It's here's this grant or whatever to get vandalism, but we're going to make it so complicated that it's hard to apply for. The other one is the employer health tax. There was a lot of pushback on it and says businesses like over $1 million. And they changed it from 500 to a million, and people are just like, okay, that's great. But then they changed the calculation instead of like the first million free. Then they started it at a million, but then they increased the percentage, right? So because I've talked to some employers and they say like they don't even give people raises, they can't hire people because they don't want to get over that threshold. So that's a disincentive. So on one hand, they're saying, well, here's something for business, but then on the other hand, they got somebody there, so well, we can't lose revenue, so we got to figure it out so that they actually pay the same or more.
And that's the spiral that this government's gotten itself into, right? To your point on employer health tax, I've got a constituent who runs an industrial safety company that services major projects in British Columbia. Most of their employees are in Alberta because they actually cannot afford to employ people in BC and be competitive. So, work on projects in BC is being done by people who are employed in Alberta and are paying taxes in Alberta. So, who's getting the benefits of the taxes? Alberta, not
Yeah.
BC, because we've actually driven people out of the province with the incredibly high payroll costs that we've imposed that make it very difficult to be cost competitive relative to businesses that are based in other jurisdictions with more affordable payroll costs.
Yeah, I would tell people to go take a look at that employer health tax because it's very. Um, where you get to stand at the podium and says we're not charging people for $1 million and under for small businesses, but then 1,100,000, all of a sudden that in percentage actually increases, and it's very punitive, right? So like I said,
We shouldn't be punishing success, Jim, right? We don't like these artificial, the way they've done a lot of these caps, set it up so that you are basically across a lot of the tax policy and regulatory policy we have in British Columbia, we basically incentivize businesses to remain small.
yeah,
Don't
for
grow
sure,
or we'll punish you.
yeah.
And what kind of logic is that? That's absurd, right? Isn't it? It's the same thing, the same logic that's been applied in terms of craft distillers and craft brewers who are desperately trying to get a tax system set up that doesn't punish them if they're successful. We should want people to grow their businesses. We should want them to hire more people. We should want them to sell more product, generate more wealth, and pay more taxes so we can afford to pay for the services that we all rely on from government.
It's almost like they're sitting around in a room says we need something to appease businesses, but also we need you to make it kind of like work so that they don't lose any revenue, so that they pay the same. But it sounds good at the podium, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the same punitive damages to them.
Exactly. And again, that's what this report from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business is highlighting is just the very specific policies they've continued to call for, including changes to the rates and the thresholds for some of those taxes on small business, so that we can actually get away from that punitive situation where small businesses have disincentives from growth just at a time when we so desperately need to create employment. And in particular, with those small businesses that are employing young people, we're facing youth unemployment, the likes of which we haven't seen since 1998. We need to do everything we can to unlock opportunity so that we can get people into that first rung on the ladder of employment. It's absolutely brutal what we saw with, for example, students returning to school have astronomically low employment. We actually saw, I think, 19.2% unemployment among young male students returning to school. So, like that's pretty bleak when you think about the future of those young people, and when you think about what economists talk about as scarring. Right, when you're struggling to get that first job, when you're unable to get a job that is fulfilling, when you're unable to get yourself onto that beginning ladder, the beginning rungs of the ladder and work your way up, that has long-term implications in terms of your long-term earning capability and potential and your ability to accumulate wealth and get ahead. So we really have to address that huge challenge we have around youth unemployment.
So Pierre Poilievre has come out and wants the temporary foreign workers program scrapped or redone, and minus the agricultural workers. And Daniel Smith has come out in support of that as well, as has David Eby. Do you support that as well, that it needs to be redone, reworked, so that it isn't punishing our youth?
Yeah, it definitely needs to be reworked. We've been very clear in terms of our position on the agricultural component. I think it's broadly understood that our ag sector would be in real trouble if we didn't have well functioning programs for agricultural workers. I know a cherry grower who lost 40% of their crop this year under the current program because they couldn't actually get enough farm labor. So there's serious challenges on that side. But we do need to address the temporary foreign worker issue more broadly. And John Rustad has been very clear that what we would do is we would get provincial control. What we need is to make sure that the program is actually working for the needs of British Columbia, and that entails making sure we're able to dial it in so that it's working where it needs to work, so it's shut down where it needs to be shut down, and so that we're maintaining things like the agricultural stream that are really crucial for our food producers, our food prices, and our food security.
The one that seems to be making a lot of Canadians angry is the restaurants, the fast food joints and that, and saying, and then Doug Ford coming out and saying that, like the Canadians need to look, the youth need to look harder. Patty had you saying they need to have better skills. I worked in the restaurant. You don't need a lot of skills. You just need to be willing. And then, David Eby calling out Starbucks and Boston Pizza and hiring, like assistant managers and that, and not hiring youth.
Yeah, I grew up mopping floors and stocking shelves in a pet store and then delivering pizza, right? Those are kind of those are or were rites of passage for young people who, the job's not that hard, but you're learning how to work. You're learning how to show up on time. You're learning how to take direction. You're learning how to, provide constructive feedback. You're learning how to work with people. So I look back and I think of that as being like foundational. There's things I learned when I was 16 years old, mopping up other people's dog poo in the aisles of Pet Cetera, that I carry forward to this day. So I think it is really important that we are affording the opportunity for young people to get into those first jobs. And of course, that we're also realistic that there are places in the country, places in the province where it is extraordinarily difficult to find employees. So that's why we want to make sure we have provincial control over the way that it's working so that we can dial it in to suit the actual needs of our labor market and to make sure that young people are getting those opportunities, particularly in a soft economy, particularly in an economy affected by job displacement due to artificial intelligence and other changes that are happening in the economy. We need to have a really solid youth employment strategy to set people up for success.
I don't know the exact stat that knows how many people worked in the restaurant industry when they were young, but I know just from my personal experience, it's a lot of people because it's an entry level job. It's a, like it's you walk up there and you said I'm willing to work, and you start as a dishwasher or mopping the floors or whatever it is you start as, and you move up. I started as a silver and ceramics technician, I like to say, a dishwasher, and then worked myself up to the chef after a year. But I mean, it was because of on the job training, and then you have our youth that like it's some parts of Canada at 20%. And then you have people saying they're not trained enough, and then the BC Restaurant Association boss there saying that the Canadians don't want to do that work, and I find that hard to believe. And they use one piece of advice or evidence to say this kid wants to be in a hockey camp, but I mean that's not enough, right? So I think kids
Yeah,
would
there
take
has to be
this.
balance in those
Yeah,
programs, Jim. Yeah, there
yeah.
has to be balance, right? I mean, let's be honest, our restaurants and storefront businesses are facing a huge number of different challenges, which gets us into the broader conversation. We've seen the highest bankruptcy rates in the restaurant sector that we've seen in a generation. You've got a majority of restaurateurs indicating that they are being directly affected by vandalism and violence. They're really on the receiving end of a wave of challenges that have been thrown at them, while also dealing with food cost inflation, margin compression, all those other things. So I recognize and respect the fact that our restaurants and our storefront businesses really are struggling. But we do need to dial the program in. And I think, again, our position's been very clear that we want provincial control so that we're not having policies imposed on us from Ottawa that don't work for British Columbia.
What would the conservatives say right now to businesses? What is it that what are you pitching ideas? Like Pierre Poilievre is telling the federal government, take my ideas and use them, and let's get going here. Is the BC Conservatives doing something similar with EB, or how are you pitching ideas that'll save businesses here in BC?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great challenges being in opposition, of course, is that every time you put out a good idea, the government immediately steals it, and in some cases screws it up. But we're trying to make sure that we're really constructive in terms of the feedback we're providing. I think when it comes to the kinds of feedback around what small business needs, The answer is not complicated, Jim. It starts with actually listening to small business. There are organizations that exist and have existed for years and decades that were set up to make sure they could advocate on behalf of business. They know what their members need and want in order to be successful. And this government ignores them. In fact, the provincial government had a small business roundtable that was set up to represent voices of small business from all around the province. They actually wrote a pretty great report around exactly what small business needed several years ago, which included changes to the employer health tax and other items. The government ignored it. They've made no progress on it, and they shut down the small business roundtable. So, if there's one piece of advice that I think the Conservatives would offer to the government, it's start listening to business. These are people that are constructive. They want to help. They're patriotic Canadians, patriotic British Columbians. They care deeply about their communities. And the kinds of policies and suggestions and ideas we see them put forward time and again are not selfish. They're constructive, well-intended ideas that are based on, having tons of conversations with different business people. For gosh sake, David Eby, just start listening to business. If you want to have a reset with the business community, pick up the phone, talk to business, listen to them, read the darn reports, and start implementing some of these common sense ideas that are being brought forward in order to make things better, create more opportunity, create hope for our next generation, strengthen our economy, and get this province back on its feet again.
Yeah, sometimes I think the government that's sitting, they think the solution is to all this regulation and red tape and payroll taxes, and that is just more regulation and more.
Oh, we need more bureaucracy to support the ever-growing bureaucracy. It's the self-licking ice
Yeah,
cream cone, as a
that's right.
NASA bureaucrat put it in the 60s, right? It's just we need a report on the report. And Jim, if we could do a report about how many reports we've commissioned on reporting, then we would have a report that synthesizes all the reports, and we could hand it over to a dedicated bureaucracy to track the reports.
Yeah, it's
That's
like
this government in action.
plugging a power bar into itself, and so you have an endless energy supply.
Exactly. I think, again, not to belabor the point, Jim, but it comes down to culture, right? Politics is downstream from culture, and you got to start with the culture. We have a culture in British Columbia right now that is can't do. We have a culture where we've lost confidence, we've lost our mojo, we've lost our reverence and our veneration for the small businesses and the entrepreneurs that actually have grown our economy and will continue to be the future. We've actually got to start celebrating success again, encouraging enterprise, encouraging young people to think of business as being something they can actually have success in here in British Columbia, rather than either giving up or leaving and going and being successful somewhere else and then coming back to visit occasionally. We need people to succeed here in British Columbia, and that requires a significant policy change from the top down.
I talk to lots of businesses, and including ourselves. And I think one of the paramount things is they want safety and security for their employees and their customers. I think that is one of the paramount things. It's hard to operate without that. And the second thing is to be not punished for trying to grow your business, to not be punished. And I think there's enough punishments out there right now in those increasing taxation. Like I, we had one client that said, or a business that said, I think they had about 8 locations here in the Okanagan Valley, and they were a grocer. And when they brought in the employer health tax and that increase, and they brought in the increasing minimum wage, the margins are so thin, they closed them all down. So there's 100 jobs gone. And these were
And
all
that's
student
happening
jobs. These
all
are all
over the place,
student
Jim.
jobs. Yeah, these were all student jobs. So that's what they were hiring. That was their first, their first jobs. And then, and it just the regulations and all the extra tax burden and the payroll tax burden on them just killed them.
Yeah, there's nothing sadder than walking through, a boarded business district that used to be vibrant, or walking down the alleys and seeing what's happening there. As I said earlier, that's what we just did last week in Prince George, Williams Lake, and Quesnel, and the same thing is happening all over the province. Our business districts are dying, Jim. They desperately need help, and that requires integrative thinking. That requires recognizing that, of course, there are the business policies, the policies we think of as being business policies, red tape, taxation, regulatory policies, and there's also those upstream drivers that are huge issues, including the crisis of mental health and addiction, the incomplete reversal of decriminalization, the crisis of brain damage on our streets. that is making it completely unsafe. It's making our business districts places that people are scared to go to, that businesses are scared to go to, and honestly, places where it feels like nobody in their right mind would gamble on opening a new business, right? I mean, starting a new business is like having a child, Jim. It's an act of hope. It's an act of belief that the future will be better than the present. You have to believe you can succeed in order to start a new business. That's why I think culture matters so much. When people feel like they can succeed here, when people feel like they are supported, when they feel like there's a government on their side, when they feel like they have the safety and security and predictability in which to invest their sweat equity, their labor of love, then we're going to see business flourish again in this province. But that's not going to happen unless there is a dramatic change in direction, both from a policy and a political and a cultural perspective.
Yeah, I think even when young people start out, they don't recognize that there's a big payroll tax burden because they say, well, I'm only getting $18, $19 an hour, but they don't realize there's another 20, 25% with benefits and CPP and EI and EHT and all these other things, sick days and all these other things that, and obviously holiday pay and all these things that add on to this payroll tax burden. So when a business goes to hire some, they have to cost that though, right? They can't ignore those numbers. And then also then the crime factors in there, the loss of the shrinkage is a huge one, and the security, and like people just not feeling safe, and that is the big one. And loss of customers because of that, like feeling of some people won't go downtown to shop.
Exactly, Jim. So when you're losing customers because they won't go downtown, you're losing customers because consumer confidence is rock bottom. You're losing customers because the customers lost their jobs, or because they're paying more taxes and more mortgage interest and more for everything. That really creates a downward spiral, and that again is why we're on the verge of a recession right now. We've got to turn it around, and that starts with actually implementing common sense policies that can rebuild business confidence and get people investing in British Columbia again.
Well, with that said, I think that's a powerful thing. We got to get people investing. I think that's the big thing you and I have talked about many times, how we need to get investment capital back into British Columbia. I think that is the key thing for sure. And anything else you want to add today?
No, Jim, I appreciate you taking the time. And again, I appreciate the Canadian Federation for Independent Business for putting out the great report that they launched this morning. I think it's a really excellent, robust analysis, lots of good data, lots of evidence, lots of common sense solutions. It's the kind of advocacy and information that I'm always really impressed when I see come out from any stakeholder in business or otherwise. So I'm appreciative of them doing that work. And I sure hope that the government of British Columbia, as well as others, will actually pick up that report, read it, start listening to business, and start implementing common sense solutions that will get our economy back on track.
We're going to put that in the story as well. So we'll link that as well so people can look at that, because capital looks for investment opportunities, but you need to compete for it, right? So where does BC fit in that competition? That's what that report highlights. Again, thank
Absolutely,
you.
Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching Now Media.
Just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now.